Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm so pleased today to have as my guest Dr. Gracie Yuen, who's a chiropractic physician, a certified member of the International Association of Hygienic Physicians with a long history and experience in fasting people, as well as being the owner and founder of Dr. Gracie's Wellness Center, which is a live-in residential fasting center in Farmington, Ohio. So welcome, Gracie. It's so good to see you. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frank. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I was looking over a bio and interview you had done, and everybody finds their way into this way of living in a lot of different avenues. Sometimes it's a health issue, sometimes it's an animal rights issue or concern about the environment. But I noticed going back into the 90s, one of the provocations for you was some health issues related to respiratory stuff, allergies, and it led you to the NHA and then to a common mentor that we both have, Dr. Scott. So why don't you let people know about that journey? Share that with them if you can.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I was in my early 30s, and I was thought I was invincible in my 20s, and then things started, falling apart a little bit, and then I discovered I had a genetic anemia. So Thalassemia Minor runs in the family. And then I thought, well, maybe that's why I'm so tired, or, I was getting infections. And it kind of propelled me to look for some answers, because I was like, oh, something's wrong with my blood, Right. It turns out it really wasn't that serious, but I'll always have the genetic anemia, but it's not really that serious. But a friend of mine gave me the book Fit for Life. And she herself didn't actually go by it, but she gave it to me. She thought maybe I would be helped by it. So I read it, and then I joined the NHA at the Natural Hygiene Society at the time. And I ordered Dr. Shelton's books, like a bunch of his books, and I read them all. I just devoured it all. I read Thalassemia Explained by John Tilden. That one was really instructive, and it was so simple and profound. And I, early on when I was a undergraduate the first time, advisor wanted me to be a doctor. But I was only like 18 or 19. I'm like, oh, no way, that's never going to happen. I was like, I couldn't see it. I was like, oh, no, that's not going to happen. But then I was reading John Tilden, and I started reading all this hygienic literature. And I began to understand how the body works, and how, you get sick and you got to rebuild your health and take care of yourself and, reduce your stress and eat right and all this. And so I started doing it. And then for about 5 years, my life just kind of got better and better. And the first year was kind of rough. I remember I had a lot of detoxification symptoms. I was just tired a lot. I had a lot of, that's what people can't give up. When you start detoxifying, my body was throwing off all these toxins I had accumulated for years. And I missed a lot of work, but I could tell I was getting better. And I never had to take antibiotics ever again since then. And then gradually, I just saw it from head to toe, my whole life, my whole body just improved. And for a period of 5 years, I just saw, one improvement over the next: skin, hair, whatever, no more infections, and, energy going through the roof. And I could understand, doing the reading, I began to understand what was wrong with me and, how to get better. And so I actually could understand being in fact, being a doctor wasn't quite so overwhelming. Then I went to my first NHA large conference in '96, and you were there, and all, Goldhammer and Dr. Furman, and we were all still around.
Right.
And I remember that I sat through that. I was just in awe of all the speakers and everything everybody was saying, and I was just soaked it all up completely. I felt like it was more important than going to medical school.
Well, you were particularly impressed with Dr. Scott at that time, right? I mean, that
Yes,
was
for
one of
some
the things
reason
that turned you on.
yes, for some reason we had round tables, and I remember I had some issues that I remember bringing up to him, and he answered my questions, and then there was I think I'd met him at a Maryville smaller conference with him and Doug Graham. And at that time, I got to know him. And then I saw him again at the larger conference. And we became I became acquainted with him. And then I always wanted to do a long fast, but work and everything. And it wasn't until 2004 that I got it together, and I went to Dr. Scott's. And what I did was I was driving through on the turnpike one day, and I just, made a turn into Dr. Scott's just to see what it was like. Because I was like, if I'm going to spend all this time in a place, I want to know what the atmosphere is like. So I remember I stopped by, and I think Wilma was there. And I just saw people resting. It was a peaceful environment. I thought, okay, I could do this. So then I scheduled and had my first long fast after I had gone back to school to I finished my bachelor's degree. So first time around, I had a crisis, I guess, of what I was doing, and I didn't see what I was. I didn't have any purpose in going to school, so I ended up quitting. Of course, that was, anathema to my family, but I had to be, honest to what myself at that time. And so I ended up quitting after my, right at the beginning of my junior year. And of course, my advisor was devastated. She wanted me to be a doctor. But at the time, I just couldn't see it. It was just, back then. But then when I was in my late 30s, and I had become a member of the Natural Hygiene Society, and, I was learning all this, and I was like, well, maybe I had a period of, I actually had a little bit of financial freedom because my friend and my roommate and I had bought a condo. And I had a little bit of financial freedom. I was like, well, I said to God, I said, Lord, is there something else you want to do that I should do with my life? And I thought, well, being a doctor was such a long, far gone idea. I was like, oh, that's just, it still kind of intrigued me.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to get my bachelor's degree first. So we had all become known Colin Campbell. So I really enjoyed listening to Colin Campbell. I got his newsletter. So I thought, well, if nutritional science was good enough for him, it's good enough for me. So UW-Madison was like 10 minutes from my house at the time. So I just took one class, and then I was able to flex my schedule at work. And I took one class, and I just got my feet wet. And then I met Colin Campbell at the 98 Health Science Conference. And after that, I decided to go full. I met him, and he was very encouraging. He even knew my advisor, which was interesting. And then I went full time. It still took me 6 years to finish my undergraduate because I knew enough of hygiene to know that I couldn't just go headlong into like school without completely wrecking my health.
Right.
So I went half time, and
Gracie, during that time, before you did the long fast, had you done some shorter fasts to experience what it was like before you actually jumped into
Yes, I did I knew I was supposed to go more than 3 days. So I did 3 days on my own. And then I think I ate for a couple of days, and then I went back into it. I did that for a few times. Like for 11 days, I fasted on my own and just kind of like interspersed it with some eating. And I didn't go longer than 3 days on my own. Absolutely. It definitely jump-started me.
And then I know in your professional journey, I mean, you went back to chiropractic college, much later in life. So what was the stimulus for that? What was the turn on for you to
Okay,
choose
so
chiropractic as a path? Just out of curiosity.
yes. So I went to UW-Madison as a medical school, and I would pass the medical school every day, and I took one class there. And I heard all the horror stories about the, 24-hour on call and the no sleep. And I'm like, that's just not the way to live. I just couldn't see it. And then what did it for me was I didn't want to be vaccinated to work in a hospital. But I was thinking about being a doctor. So after I finished my undergrad, I took a year off from school. And that's when I did my first fast with Dr. Scott. So I knew I had run my candle out too far. And so I need a fast. I need a long fast. So I went to Dr. Scott's. I told him, there's nothing really wrong with me and then he said that of. He was always, he would always say that. So lo and behold, I got to Dr. Scott's in the summer of 2004. I was just planning on being there for like 3 weeks. And here I had a irregular heartbeat. He goes, "You have an irregular heartbeat." I'm like, "Oh, really?" Oh no. So he says, "You better get, so I started fasting right away. And he told me, well, the more you rest, the faster you'll heal. So I just, plopped in bed and, all I did was turn from one side to the other, got up for water, listened to my roommates, turn from one side to the other. I got pretty weak. And I ended up doing a 25-day water fast. And I believe on the 11th day, my heart went back to normal. So that was exciting.
Yeah, that's exciting. So from there, let me take this little break and then we'll come back because I want to talk to you about your journey a little bit more.
Oh, sure.
I'm here with Dr. Gracie Yuen, and chiropractic physician, the director of Dr. Gracie's Wellness Center in Ohio, which is a residential fasting center. We're going to take a few words to hear from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Health Science Podcast Show. I want to remind you to visit the National Health Association website, where you'll find incredible resources to support your healthy lifestyle, including plant-exclusive eating without added salt, oil, and sugar. Simply go to healthscience.org or nationalhealthassociation.org. Be sure to check out membership, which is only $35 per year for those living within the United States and $55 for those living outside the U.S. You'll be amazed at all the information and benefits you'll receive. As a member, you're kept up to date on the latest evidence-based tools for health promotion. You'll receive the incomparable quarterly magazine, Health Science, a beautiful 40-page advertising-free publication mailed to your home or offices, loaded with articles, recipes, inspirational stories, and interviews with world leaders in the fields of personal health, plant-based nutrition, water-only fasting, animal rights, and environmental support. And you'll receive details about life-changing events, such as the extraordinary annual conference of the National Health Association and diverse opportunities for plant-exclusive NHA cruises and travel vacations to exotic destinations around the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm here with Dr. Gracie Yuen. And Gracie, let me ask you a question. Through that time, had you experienced chiropractic care too? That was something that provoked you to think about doing that as a profession?
Yes, I had a chiropractor in Madison that I liked, and then Dr. Scott was a chiropractor. And let's see, seems like there was one more, but But I thought, and then I saw that, you're a chiropractor, Dr.
Alan was
Goldhammer.
too, Dr. Goldhammer. Yeah. So all of us really had
Yeah,
done this.
so I was like, and then the whole thing, I didn't want to be vaccinated to go to work in a hospital.
Right.
That was the main, and I didn't want to do drugs. I didn't want to be a pill pusher. I didn't mind the idea of taking people off. But the whole idea of remove the cause of disease, let the body heal itself, is chiropractic philosophy. And then what did it was when I fasted at Dr. Scott's. So I was thinking about it, praying about it. Should I go be a doctor? Should I go be a chiropractor? And so I talked to Dr. Scott afterwards. He goes, "Oh yeah." I said, I said, "Dr. Scott, with someone my age, with my condition, what do you think about me going to be a chiropractor?" He jumped on. He's like, "Oh yeah, you should do it."
I know, and I know he's a big national man, so I know you were going to go to National College at that point too.
Yes, and so then I was going to go to Palmer, and then they had some goofy thing with my prerequisites that they weren't accepting something. And so then I looked at National, and I was like, they accepted me right away, and the door opened, and away I went. So I was happy I went there.
Yeah, so that's an amazing thing. So once you finished with through that, you went back and did a little bit of apprentice time with Dr. Scott, but that really wasn't didn't last very long. And I know then you made your journey to True North.
Yes.
I had my own issues with Dr. I understand the dance with Dr. Scott. Trust me, I was with him a full year.
Yeah.
And I'm talking going back into the 1970s when he was even more intense. By the 90s, by the 90s and the 2000s, he had actually mellowed out a little
You
bit.
think so?
In the late 70s, oh my God, it was really pretty intense being with him. But look, I ran his blood lab, and we'll talk more about that because that was really his claim to fame and really the mark that he made on fasting care. But talk to me about your journey with True North. And I bring this up because, when you go online, there are so many now of these like fasting programs where people just serendipitously with no background are looking at doing these extensive fasts, and they don't really understand the monitoring part of that and how important that can be and the kind of training that we actually have done to become certified doctors to do this. So talk about that journey, what you experienced at True North, the level of training, the level of insight that provided.
Yes, that was a wonderful experience. I was kind of nervous going out there. Dr. Goldhammer kept saying, "Oh, we're so looking forward to having you with us." I'm like, "You don't even know who I am." But I guess he asked Dr. Scott about me, whatever. And I was committed for a full 6 months. I was going to go out there for 6 months. Me and Joan, my roommate, were going out there. And I was going to do the full internship. That's what I went into school to fast people. And that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't just going there to see what was going on, which a lot of the interns, they go there just, there's curiosity seekers kind of, which is fine because they need to be exposed. But I really wanted to do the whole 9 yards. I wanted to do it myself. I mean, I was so happy that there were so many doctors there, like Dr. Helms trained me, and there was Dr. Goldhammer, Dr. Clapper, and Dr. Sultana. And I hung out with them. I hung out with Dr. Sultana a lot, just following his patients, and Dr. Clapper too. And I pretty much ran the rounds. Back then, we had like 16 to 25 patients, which is so small compared to now. But
right.
But I pretty much got the whole rounds thing just kind of thrown in my lap. And I did rounds morning and evening for like the first 2 or 3 weeks. It was just me. Like there was nobody else. And then I had to order labs and make sure everybody came in for their blood work and keep track of, the beauty of it was that you followed the patient from beginning to end. I did the intakes, the general, hey, what's going on? When they, come off the plane, they get there. And then they would see Dr. Sultana or Dr. Clapper, or Dr. Helms. And then I would, do the rounds on them, on the blood, take the vitals. And then my favorite part of the week was the Monday meetings where we would discuss all the patients. And then, I got to know every single patient, all their conditions. why they were there, what meds they were on. I knew everything about them. And then, we discussed, what the plan was. And then that first year, I worked, I didn't have a license. Actually, Dr. Goldhammer invited me to come on as a staff doctor right away and see chiropractic patients. And I wasn't really, that wasn't my plan, so I didn't get my license right away. But there was this one patient who wanted me to work on her knees. She had a knee issue. And I had trained under another chiropractor in school who taught me a lot of muscle work. I knew how to work on muscles. So she was my first patient, and Dr. Goldhammer let me work under his license. So I began seeing patients as kind of like under Dr. Goldhammer's license. And, I would see, now this is for anybody out there who's thinking about I highly recommend being a chiropractor. I absolutely love it. I've seen I can do so many creative things with my chiropractic, with the fasting. And at True North, there were things that I would see, and I would, in my mind, I would see this patient, and then I would, go on rounds, and I'd poke around and, hey, what do you feel when I push here, And then there were some things that I would figure out that like these patients were, I remember this one patient, she had a really severe case of constipation. And she said that she had pudendal nerve entrapment. This is what the doctors had discovered. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at pictures of the pudendal nerve online, and I saw that it was vulnerable, right? The sacrum, right where the piriformis comes right in the middle, right here. It comes out of one of the foramen and goes, dips into the other one. This in the nerve. And so I was working on her anyway, and so I jabbed my elbow into her sacrum, and here she was, so tight there. Mm-hmm. So I worked on her, and she was a concrete slab from here to her sacrum, and back then I worked on her like, every day for like an hour sometimes, and she couldn't have a bowel movement on her own without, like, she couldn't go on vacation without having a colonic. She had to take something or have a colonic, and no matter how much fiber she ate. And so by the end of her long fast, she fasted for like 20 some days. She walked into me and Dr. Clapper shared a suite. So she walks into the suite and she goes, Dr. Gracie, I had a bowel movement. After she started refeeding, she had her bowel movement on her own. Dr. Clapper, I had a bowel movement. So we're all crying and hugging her, so excited because this patient she was really a severe case. And not only that, but her personality improved. So she was really irritable. She was like really on edge, and people didn't like, the interns didn't like to go in and do rounds on her because she was so irritable,
Well, having a couple of regular bowel movements will improve your personality. You know that, right? It's such an interesting marriage, chiropractic with fasting care. I know some people have always been a little averse to doing any of that kind of deeper trigger point work and so on, actually during the fast itself. So do you usually wait till they're done, or how do you integrate that in your own practice?
Well, in my practice, when you first come to see me, it includes a chiropractic exam and a first treatment. And if the patient wants it, I give treatments all through the fast. Now I do shorten them. Now if they're getting weak, I'll do just like a 10-15 minute treatment. Right. But I will do it every day if it's indicated.
Yeah. So okay, let me finish. I'm here with Dr. Gracie Yuen. Gracie, where will people find you? What's the location where they can find you for more information about you and the center?
Yeah, my website is dr-gracie's-wellness-center-llc.business.site. It's kind of cumbersome,
Okay.
But if you just search on Google, because it's the Google site, Dr. Gracie Yuen, you should be able to find it.
Yeah, not a problem. Not a problem at all. So going from, I know you went to Dr. Goldhammer for a 6-month internship and ended up staying about 5 years. I know you had
Yeah, I
talked about
stayed
that,
5
and
years.
I know how life kind of does that. So now, when you kind of segued from there, talk about the evolution of creating your own center, because that's such an exciting opportunity when you really make that step. It's not easy. I know how
Yeah,
difficult it
yeah,
is to set up a business, but you've got
yeah,
this beautiful 7-bedroom house in this
yeah.
beautiful part of Ohio. So
How
talk
did that
about how
happen?
that all transpired.
Well, when I was going through school, I was gonna go to chiropractic school and help Dr. Scott. That was, yeah, I was gonna help him. I was gonna continue his work. I was gonna go to Ohio. That was my goal. And then I got there, and then we had a disagreement, and I went off to True North. But in my head, I was always like, I was a Midwesterner. I wanted to go back to Ohio. I felt like Ohio was, has a good board, scope of practice for chiropractors, and which not all states are good for chiropractors for this type of work. This is an excellent state for to do fasting in Ohio is wonderful. They know what I'm doing. The board knows me, and so anyway, so when I was at True North, and I kept thinking about. In fact, me and Dr. Scott kind of made up before he died. He wanted me to come back, but it was like, no, I can't come back right now. And then I was, we kind of were talking again, but then he went and died. And then, and so I was always kind of in my mind rumbling around, how would this work? How, it was overwhelming, really.
Yeah, it is.
I was a new grad. Then of course, Gary, the lawyer, came around. You were there at True North. He was kind of trying to see he offered to me, did I want to come and take over Dr. Scott's practice? I said, no, I'm not ready. I can't do that. It's too overwhelming. I mean, I knew I was a new graduate, and it was just like, no way, that's just not going to happen. I needed to be at True North with all those doctors. I needed to be there and see enough patients to have the confidence to go out on my own. And so by the time I had been at True North about 4 or 5 years, I'd been seeing patients, and I was having good success with patients, like chiropractic patients, getting rid of back pain, neck pain, hip pain, shoulder pain, you name it, whatever it was. I could not believe how much I could do. I was just like amazed. They didn't tell me I would have this much fun as a chiropractor when I was in chiropractic school. And so I guess it's a combination of having the right people to teach me. Like I learned from Dr. Scott. I learned from Craig Hilgendorf in Wheaton. He was a neurologist, chiropractic neurologist. Brilliant man. And I learned from him. I worked for him for 4 years while I was in school. I learned muscles, and I worked on people, when I was in school. And then just being, having all those people right there at True North. And then one patient would have a success, and they go out and they talk to everybody else in the courtyard about me. And the next thing I know, my schedule is filled with patients.
Right.
And then, I had so many patients. I didn't, my practice thrived at True North. So that gave me a boost. So I knew that if I, no matter what happened to the fasting part, I knew I could get people well just with chiropractic.
You could always lean on that, and that would be a strong suit for you. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yes. So that was one thing. And then, Dr. Scott had a best friend named Richard. Did you know Richard?
I don't know if I knew. What was Richard's? What did Richard do?
Richard set up his lab.
Oh, okay. So we're going way back. Yeah. So that was going way back then. He knew Richard for a long time then.
Yeah, it was Richard who inspired Dr. Scott to have a lab, according to Richard, because he's still alive. Richard is now 88. And Richard well, I was still in contact with Richard when I went to True North. So every now and then Richard would say, hey, why don't you come back to Ohio? And then so I would kind of talk about it, and he was trying to find a place. And then, the Amish people, Dr. Scott had an Amish acquaintance, Alvin Kime, and he was instrumental in getting the Amish to buy Dr. Scott's lab for $10,000.
I see.
So they acquired all of his equipment. And and then I ended up moving near where this lab was supposed to be set up. And in fact, that's how I found this place, because I punched in their address and then I found this piece of property right away. It was like, bam, 7-bedroom house, 2.5 miles away from, this other property, the Amish people.
So are you still using that Amish lab now in your work?
No, actually, they didn't have their setup up and running at the time.
I see.
And then since then, they never did get it going.
Okay.
But they have their thing. They have a Amish center for plain people.
I see.
And it's for mental illness, actually. And they use William Walsh's protocols.
Okay.
The Nutrient Power Book.
So if you need to do blood work of any kind, you do it through conventional labs like LabCorp and Quest like that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I use LabCorp. I draw my own blood in the spirit of Dr. Scott.
Oh, you're a hardcore, like, Dr. Scott was, baby.
I have his lab coat in my closet, his last lab coat.
Wow.
I have his table in my office.
That's a collector's item, both of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I practiced in his office with him chiropractically when I was there too.
Yeah,
he had his office on the west side of Lorraine Avenue, and then we'd go out to Strongsville.
I was gearing up for that. I was gearing up to do that with him.
I had a little apartment. He gave me a little apartment in that building where the chiropractic office was.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Also where the lab was, because the lab was there too. Right.
And you ran the lab, huh?
For about a year. Yeah, that's part of my duty. But it was great because, like when you do that, the parameters in fasting care are certainly a little bit different than what you're typically taught for regular medical laboratory work. So it was great to have his input and his experience with that.
Absolutely.
Do you still use any of his urine testing things like from the past or any of that?
I acquired his ferric nitrate urine chemicals, and I even have the little bottles, with the stoppers. And occasionally I'll have a patient that we do that with. And I learned, I did help Dr. Scott in his lab for 2 months while I was there. So you were exposed to it, so Absolutely.
So in your center now, let's talk about that. I mean, you're attracting people with all kinds of issues. How many people can you take in your center? How many bed space?
Well, we have 4 guest rooms, and we have most of the rooms have 2 beds, and we have 1 queen bed. So technically, we can have 8 people.
I got it.
But the most we've ever had is 6, and right now I've decided to cut it down to 4, just so that it's more manageable until we get more help on board. But we have had 6, and usually it runs 4 to 6.
Do you close in the winter at all when it gets really cold, like January, February? I know that was Dr. Scott's thing.
I decided to do that too. We close around December, and we open up in February after Joe's birthday.
In your center, then, do you do? Tell me about. Do you do any ongoing education? Do you lecture on a routine basis?
No, I don't have any. We have more informal education.
Okay.
So every now and then I'll do like a little class. Like maybe how to pick a watermelon. That's my favorite class. How to pick a melon. I guess that's my favorite class, but it's one I like to do. And then I do some foundation training sometimes.
And are you doing relatively long fasts when it demands it, or how does it work?
40.
Oh, well, that's substantial. Back in the day, those were kind of routine, and then they kind of fell out of favor, and then everybody was kind of doing shorter fasts a little bit, maybe 2-3 weeks at the most. But I remember those days that you could do 40, 50-day fasts. And I know
Really? Did you
Dr.
see
Scott
50?
routinely could do 40, 50-day fasts if he,
Oh, really? I don't remember the 50 ones, but
yeah, he back in the 70s, I'm talking about now. His line would be, Dr. Scott, how long am I going to fast? Well, till you're skin and bones. He said that a few times to a few people.
well, I remember that was literally what it looked like
Yeah, I know.
when I did 2 long fasts there. And I would say that my first fast really, when I saw the people getting well and the amazing things, that's what did it for me. I was like, okay, I'm in on this.
So talk about some of the rewarding cases at your center. Talk a little bit about to the audience so they understand the kind of diversity of the kinds of things that you are exposed to for fasting.
Yes. Now I can't say we had so many long-term fasts. Um, but I would say I see a lot of very fascinating things that I do with my chiropractic treatment. So I've helped people avoid surgery. I recently had a lady avoid back surgery. Um, I had one lady who she just had aches and pains everywhere. She was just toxic. She couldn't even sit still. She was like, she couldn't sit, she couldn't stand.
Uh-huh.
She was so uncomfortable. She was so irritable. She was just, just this ball of nerves.
Right.
And then we fasted her and I treated her and she's doing great. Like her personality changed. I see people's personalities improve. That's why I wrote the article on sympathetic dominance, because I see that as lots of my patients are just.
That's a great article, by the way. I wanted to tell you that too. It's really great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And and they cut out a lot of the parts that were more technical, but the area that I work on, the neck, around with the vagus nerve, I literally see patients just kind of deflate, when they're just keyed up and stressed out, with COVID, everybody's all stressed out. And but I see a lot of just unusual things, I think. The I know I mentioned one lady, she had like a interstitial cystitis issue, or like a weird kind of pain that nobody could figure out. And she fasted, she did well. Just the ordinary, well, garden variety, high blood pressure, diabetes,
Right.
Heart problems. We don't fast people on who have AFib. Did Dr. Scott fast people with AFib?
He did what?
Did Dr. Scott fast people with AFib?
I don't remember him doing that, but nothing would surprise me with Dr. Scott. He was Dr. Scott was hardcore. He felt
I
like
know.
fasting is going to take care of it all. Just let's get in here and let's fast. I know.
Yeah, because now we don't fast people who have AFib.
No, I don't either, and I understand that. So, but he may have back then. I just don't remember now.
Yeah, I'm just curious. But anyway, what other unusual things have I seen? I've seen, I think I had a young kid come in, young fellow. His mother trained him not to go to see regular doctors, not to just see regular doctors. So he came to see me. He was in his early 20s, and he was having rectal bleeding and knee pain. And I'm like, why do you come to see me for the rectal bleeding? I mean, no, he didn't come to see for a fast yet.
Uh-huh.
And I had no, I was kind of befuddled. I didn't really know what to do. He kept saying, whenever my knee pain acts up, my bleeding is worse. And he couldn't even work because he stood at his job and he was bleeding too much. And so I was treating him on my table, and he repeats, whenever my knee pain is worse, my bleeding is worse. And I'm working on his quads, because the knee, I always do quads when I'm working on knees. And I'm working on his knee, I'm feeling the trigger points in his quad, and I'm thinking about the femoral crease,
Right.
where the nerve, artery, vein.
Right.
And they said in chiropractic, you can't forget your anatomy, whatever else you forget. So all of a sudden I knew what was wrong with him. It's just like a download I had. And I'm like, his circulation was being cut off, from the trigger point in his femoral crease, and it was shunting over to his circulation in his, the genital area. And so I treated him, and for his knee pain, and he went home, and then he came back a few days later, and he said he was like a third better, And then I gave him another treat.
Yeah, there's such power in all of this work. And so I'm just so glad that you're doing that. And it's just nice to see your excitement. It looks like after all these years, you're even more excited now to do what you do than even before, which is fabulous.
Yeah. So anyway, after the second treatment, his bleeding was gone. I only see him occasionally, but that was one of the most kind of mind-blowing cases, that as a chiropractor I could help.
Right.
But his mother came for a water fast.
Well, I think the work you're doing is pretty amazing, and I love the marriage of the chiropractic and the fasting care, which is so really important. Gracie, as we wind this down, is there any final words you'd like to share with the audience? Anything you'd like to tell people out here?
I think what I'd like to tell people is now is the time to get your life and your health and your life in order. Now, if you have time, we have time right now to work on your health, and don't be dependent on the medical community. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what, there's a lot of insecurities in the society right now. And I would advise people not to get any more injections and just get yourself in order, because, and now, in the National Health Association, what we teach is helping people to take care of themselves. And this is the time now to take care of yourself while you have time, before it's too late.
Well, I want to thank my very special guest, Dr. Gracie Yuen, today for, coming on and sharing her heart, her experience, some words of wisdom. And I urge you to follow Dr. Gracie. You can check her out, Google her. Her location is in the show notes that'll be attached to this particular show. And I want to really thank you for being part of this with us. And I also want to thank all the people out there that have joined us today. Without you, I can't do what we do here together. And I want to really thank you for being part of this really active, healthy community. And on behalf of the NHA, I want to thank you for being here. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.